The Vreth Dominion's 14th battle group dropped out of faster-than-light transit at 300 hours Galactic Standard Time, 14 light minutes from a yellow star that the locals called Sol. Admiral Kethres stood at the viewport of his command ship, the Times Iron Proclamation, and looked at it the way a man looks at something he already owns. He had read the files, all of them twice. Humans were young by every measure the galaxy used to measure such things. 4 centuries into space travel, their ships were slow, their weapons were functional but not exceptional. Their territory was a modest sphere centered on a single inhabited world, protected by a ring of orbital stations, a handful of deep space relays, and a military that other spacefaring species described in their intelligence reports using words like times developing times and times promising times, and once unexpectedly tenacious. That last one was from the Horde War 112 years ago. Different situation entirely. What concerned the Dominion's High Council, what had prompted 6 months of debate before they finally authorized this mission, was not any of those things. It was the border. 11 years ago, humans had placed signal buoys along a sphere 3 light hours from Sol. The buoys broadcast on every frequency in the electromagnetic spectrum. They broadcast in 29 languages, including 12 that humans had learned specifically because other species used them. The message was the same in all of them. You are approaching the Sol exclusion zone. This is Earth sovereign space. Turn around. This is not a negotiation. This is not a warning shot. This is the only warning you will receive. What happens next is your choice. The council had debated what that last line meant. What happens next is your choice. Some argued it was a bluff. Some argued it was ambiguous enough to treat as a bluff. Some argued that any species willing to broadcast that message on every frequency in the known galaxy was either genuinely dangerous or genuinely insane, and that the distinction might not matter. In the end, Kethres had argued that the answer was simple. You tested the boundary, you moved carefully with a strong fleet, and you tested it, and then you knew. The council had agreed. Move us in, he said. Survey formation, weapons cold. I want sensor sweeps running from the moment we cross. His navigation officer, a gray-scaled Vreth named Osik, who had served under Kethres for 9 years, looked up from his console. Admiral, the exclusion line is still 14 light minutes ahead. I know where it is. Kethres clasped his hands behind his back. I want us ready when we reach it. Osik nodded and passed the orders down. The Times Iron Proclamation times began to move in a room on a station orbiting Earth at 42,000 km. A woman named Commander Yale Torres looked at her sensor board and said, "Well, just the one word, flat, done." Her aide, Lieutenant Myra Asse, looked up from the adjacent console. She was 26 years old and had been assigned to the Sol monitoring station for 8 months. In that time, she had watched Torres respond to a reactor coolant leak near collision between a civilian transport and a Dominion scout probe, and the news that her own promotion review had been delayed by 6 months, all with the same expression, the expression of someone who had expected exactly this and had already decided what to do about it. They're moving, Myra asked. Moving to cross. Torres pulled up the fleet telemetry on the secondary screen. The signatures were clear and bright. 14 Ships, large ones. That's their 14th battle group, is that? One of their best, third best, tours. Studied the formation, they're not. Treating this as a full military. Engagement, third best fleet survey. Formation, weapon signatures reading. Cold, she paused, they read our warning. And decided we were bluffing. Are we? Torres looked at her for a moment. Pull up the Shepherd. Pre-activation checklist, she said. Myra's hands went to her keyboard then. Stopped right now, they'll cross the line in roughly 40 minutes. Pre-activation takes 22, Torres turned back to her desk and pulled a form from the stack of physical paperwork on the left side. She uncapped her pen, so. Yes, now, the form was an incursion form. 7 Delta. Torres had filled out 11 of them in her career. Most had been false. Alarms, probes that crossed. Accidentally unmanned vessels, 1. Embarrassing incident involving a Vreth. Merchant freighter whose navigation computer had a corrupted star chart. None of those had gotten past the warning buoys. This was different. She wrote the date, the time, the fleet designation. She noted the number of ships, their approximate tonnage class, and the direction of approach. She wrote times, deliberate incursion times in the field that asked her to classify the type of crossing because the 14th battle group had dropped out of FTL on a direct heading and had not wavered since, and no navigation computer in the galaxy was that broken. Fleet designation confirmed, Myra said. Lead ship is reading as the Times Iron Proclamation. Command class, cross-referencing against Dominion Registry. She paused. Commanding Admiral is listed as Admiral. First grade Cathris. He's got a good record. 1 engagements at the outer Tareth border, the Pelion Drift. Incident, the I know who he is. Torres wrote the name on the form neat. Small letters. He's smart, which means he crossed because he made a calculation, not because he was careless. She capped her pen. That matters for the record. Why does it matter? Because when this goes to review, I want it very clear that we gave them every opportunity to turn around and that they made a deliberate, informed decision to proceed. Torres put the completed form in the finished stack and pulled a new one. Hand me the Shepherd pre-activation log. The times Iron Proclamation times crossed the exclusion line at 3:47 hours. Nothing happened. Kethers stood at the viewport and waited. He waited for a challenge signal, a targeting alarm, a tight beam transmission from the human homeworld, telling him he had made a terrible mistake. He waited for some sign that the humans had teeth behind the warning. The stars looked back at him, quiet, unconcerned. Sensor report, he said. No. Targeting locks, said his tactical officer, a broad-shouldered veteran named Drev. No approach signature. No change in signal traffic from the inner system. The warning buoys are still broadcasting. A short pause. That is all, Admiral. Kethers nodded slowly. He had expected this, of course. He had told the council he expected this, but there was a difference between expecting a thing and standing in the place where that thing was confirmed, and he allowed himself 1 moment of quiet satisfaction before he put it away and went back to work. Continue the approach. I want the fleet spread into a proper survey. Pattern ships at standard spacing. Full passive sensor coverage. Do not activate active sensors yet. He turned from the viewport and silenced those buoys. I am tired of hearing them. His communications officer began the work of jamming the buoy frequencies. The looping message cut off. Mid-sentence, what happens next is your gone. Kethers sat down in his command chair. What do we have from initial scans? The outer system is sparse, Osik said, pulling up his data. We're detecting a passive sensor. Network listening posts, essentially no. Active emissions, just receivers. They'd know we were here. But they're not broadcasting our position. He worked through the readings. There's a mining operation on one of the outer gas giant's moons. Small installation, looks like it may be mothballed. A number of relay stations. Some old reading debris and battle scarring from at least a century ago. He looked up. There's very little here, Admiral. For a system that broadcasts such aggressive warnings, they have very little actual presence in their outer reaches. Theodore said. Cathras' second in command, Commander Thrall. He was younger, ambitious, with the kind of smile that came from being right too often. The warning is theater. They don't have the forces to back it up, so they put up a fence and hope no one climbs over. That is a reasonable interpretation, Cathras said. Send the survey ships inward. I want data on everything from the asteroid belt to the home world, particularly their orbital installations around the third planet and the construction facility at the fourth planet. Osik asked. Cathras looked at him. What construction facility? Passive sensors are picking up a very large power signature in orbit around the red planet. Osik adjusted his display. It reads as a shipyard. Quite large. How large? Larger than our facility at Vreth Prime. Cathras was quiet for a moment. Send Times Swift, Current Times, and her group to investigate carefully. Stay at range and use passive sensors only. Their survey ships are moving inward, Myra said. 3 detached from the main group, heading for the belt and the inner planets. She tracked them on the screen. One is heading toward Mars. Tors looked up from her paperwork. They're going to see the shipyard. Yeah, let them look. Tors went back to writing. It's not classified. They're going to think we're building a war fleet. We're not building a war fleet. I know that. Tors wrote for another moment. Scratching of the pen was the loudest sound in the room. Outside the station's viewports, Earth turned below them, slow and blue and enormous, its nightside scattered with the soft light of every city that had ever been built down there. All those people going about their days completely unaware that 14 alien warships were inside their solar system, deciding whether to take it seriously. Shepard. Pre-activation log complete, Myra said. Systems are standing by. Nodes are passive. No emissions, no targeting signatures. She looked at her screen. They won't see anything until we want them to. Good. Tors signed the bottom of the form she was working on. What are the survey ships doing? Swift. Current Times is at approach range of Mars. They're doing passive scans of the shipyard. Myra watched her screen. Their sensors are going to ping Node 7. What does Node 7 do when it gets pinged? It reads the incoming sensor sweep, maps the scanning ship's exact position, frequency signature, and energy output, and sends that data back to this station, Tors said. And then it gives whoever is scanning it some very confusing data returns. Myra absorbed this. So we'll know exactly where they are. We'll know exactly where they are. Tors uncapped a new pen. The old one had run dry and began a new form. Pull. Up Node 7's log when it starts. Reading them. On the bridge of the Times Swift. Current Captain Preth was narrating his findings to himself in a low voice, the way he always did when he was working. Through sensor data, it helped him. Think shipyard, he murmured, large. Human design, civilian markers on the outer structures. But the inner construction frames are reading military class materials. He adjusted the sweep. Several vessels under construction, at least 3 at a stage that I can't classify from this range. He moved the scan power relay on the far side of the primary frame. That's interesting. He tried to read it. The sensor return came back scrambled. He tried again, still scrambled. He switched to a different frequency. The scramble changed shape but stayed scrambled. He tried a third frequency. Command, he said, and his voice was a shade quieter than it had been. I have an anomaly at the Mars construction facility. One structure on the far side of the shipyard is returning sensor interference on all frequencies. Tried. I can't get a clean read on it. He watched his screen. The structure is not broadcasting, it's not doing anything active, but my sensors aren't reading through it. A pause. I've never seen this material before. Back on the Times Iron Proclamation. Cathris received the report, read it, and felt something small and cold settle in his chest. He pushed it away. Have them continue passive observation, he said. Do not attempt active sensor sweeps. Log the anomaly and move on. He stood up from his chair. One structure we can't identify is not a defense system. It's probably a new alloy they're testing, or a civilian project they've decided to shield from industrial espionage. He looked at Thrall. Humans are paranoid about their shipbuilding data. It's well documented. Thrall nodded. Of course, Admiral. Cathris went back to the viewport. The yellow star burned quietly ahead of them. Continue inward, he said. Tors. Read the Node 7 report on her screen. She set down her pen. The note had a complete sensor map of the Times Swift current, her power output, her exact heading, the precise frequency range of her scanning array, the number of crew based on life sign emissions. Everything. Tors looked at Myra. They tried 3 different frequencies. Yeah. Smart crew on that scout ship. She picked up her pen again. Write that in the supplementary log. Commend the survey ship's captain. He'll probably never read it, but the record should note it. Myra looked at her. You're commending an alien officer who's trespassing in our solar system. I'm noting that he's competent. Tors went back to her form. It matters for the record. She filled in a field. Also, it's just accurate. He is competent. Below them, Earth turned. 14 ships moved deeper into its space. Tors filled out her paperwork, and the Shepherd system breathed quietly in its nodes and waited, and the night side of Earth scattered its cities of soft light across the dark. And in the monitoring room, the only sound was the scratch of a pen on paper and the low hum of machines that were very old and very patient. Myra made a second cup of coffee and didn't say anything. Neither did Tors. There was nothing to say. Yet the saying would come later. Wrathfleet spent 6 hours inside the Sol exclusion zone and found nothing that scared them. This was, in retrospect, the most dangerous thing that could have happened. Admiral Kethries moved his ships in a careful pattern through the outer system, running passive surveys, mapping installations, cataloging every human asset within sensor range. His Officers compiled the data into clean reports. His analysts compared it against the pre-mission intelligence files. His second-in-command, Threll, summarized it, all with a smile that suggested he had already written his after-action report in his head, and it was very flattering to himself. 14 military stations, Threll said, pointing at the holographic display floating above the command table, all of them concentrated in the inner system within the orbit of the second planet. Their asteroid belt is lightly worked. We detected active mining operations at 6 sites, all civilian. No weapons emplacements, no patrol ships. He gestured at the outer planets. The outer system is essentially empty. They have listening posts, but we've been managing the signal interference from Node 7, and the other nodes are not active. He turned to Cathris. Admiral, they have declared a sphere 3 light hours across a sovereign territory, and they have put almost nothing in it. They have put the nodes in it, Cathris said. The table was quiet for a moment. Node 7 had become a recurring subject in the fleet's internal discussions, not because it had done anything, it had done nothing. It sat on the far side of the Mars shipyard and returned scrambled sensor data on every frequency they tried, and occasionally pulsed with a low energy emission that their analysts could not classify and otherwise did not engage with them at all. They had found 3 other nodes. After that, all of them passive, all of them returning the same scrambled data, all of them pulsing with that slow, even, unclassifiable signal. Cathris had ordered them documented and logged. He had not ordered the fleet to turn around. The nodes may be observation equipment, said Drev, the tactical officer. Early warning sensors with a shielded housing to prevent reverse engineering. It would be consistent with a species that is militarily modest but technologically curious. It would. Cathris agreed. He looked at the holographic display. Or they are weapons platforms. We have no weapon signatures from any node, Drev said. No targeting locks, no energy buildup. No, I know. Cathris put his hand on the edge of the table. I am simply noting that we do not know what they are. He looked at the display for another moment. We continue inward. I want a full survey of the inner system before we withdraw. If we are going to make a report to the council, it will be a thorough one. And Thrill smiled again. Of course, Admiral. In the monitoring room on the Earth station, Tors was eating a sandwich. It was tuna. She had specific feelings about the quality of the station cafeteria's tuna, which were that it was acceptable if you added enough pepper, and she had added enough pepper. She ate and looked at her screens and watched the Wraith fleet move steadily toward the inner system, like a very confident man walking into a room where all the furniture had been moved in the dark. Myra was on her third coffee. She had the look of someone who wanted to ask a question and had been talking herself out of it for the better part of an hour. Asked, Tors said. How many nodes are in the exclusion zone? Tors took another bite of her sandwich. Classified. I have level 4 clearance. Then you can read the classified file. Myra turned back to her console and pulled up the file. Tors watched her read it out of the corner of her eye. Watched the exact moment she found the number. Myra put down her coffee. That's a lot of nodes, she said. Yes. Tors agreed. And they're all. And yes. Myra was quiet for a moment. Can I ask how long it took to build? Them 41 years, Torres finished her sandwich and folded the wrapper. They started building the first ring. When I was 3 years old, I grew up knowing they were out there. My mother worked on the second ring. She dropped the wrapper in the bin beside her desk. By the time I was assigned here, the fourth ring was almost complete. 4 rings, Myra said, of varying density, depending on the approach vectors that our threat models flagged as most likely. Torres pulled up a new screen and began reviewing Node 7's latest telemetry. The outer system is the lightest coverage, the inner system is. She paused. She seemed to be deciding something. Denser, Myra looked at the fleet on her screen. 14 ships moving steadily inward, passing through the asteroid belt now. The survey ships ranging ahead, they're about to enter the inner ring, she said. I know. Torres looked at the telemetry. From Node 7, the node was tracking every ship in the fleet with a precision that their passive sensors would never reveal. She could see the Times iron proclamations Times exact heading. She could read the heat signature of Kethras's command chair if she zoomed in far enough. She did not zoom in. That seemed somehow impolite. Mark the time, log their position as they enter the primary defense sphere. Myra logged it. They both waited. The ship Times pointed ear Times was a scout vessel, one of the 2 fastest in the 14th Battle Group, and her captain was a young officer named Vel who did not entirely share Thrill's confidence that the exclusion zone was theater. He had been watching the nodes not because they did anything threatening. They didn't. They pulsed, they scrambled sensors. They floated in their positions with the quiet patience of objects that were not in any hurry. But Vel had spent 11 years in the Dominion fleet doing the kind of work that required him to pay very close attention to things that looked like they were doing nothing, and the nodes felt wrong to him the way a too quiet forest feels wrong. He was 300,000 km ahead of the main fleet running sensor sweeps of the space between the asteroid belt and Mars when Node 4 came online. Not pulsed, not scrambled, came online. It was the difference between a heartbeat and an eye opening. Command, Vel said, and his voice was very controlled. I'm reading an energy change in Node 4. It's the node fired, not at the Times pointed ear, not at anything Vel could see. It sent a tight beam of something, not a weapon frequency, not anything in his recognition library toward a point in empty space 40,000 km to his port side, and that point in empty space answered something that had been invisible became briefly fractionally visible, an outline, an edge, the barest suggestion of a shape that was very large, and then it was gone. And the something that had been there was gone with it, and his sensors were full of the kind of feedback that equipment produces when it has been asked to look at something it was not designed to understand. Command, Vel said, I need. He looked at a screen. His sensors were reading nothing. Empty space, same empty space as before, but the node was now dark again, just sitting there pulsing patient. Command, Vel said, and this time he could not entirely keep his voice level. I need to report a contact. Something was there for approximately 4 seconds. And then it wasn't. Static on the line. Then Kethras's voice. What kind of contact? I don't know. Vel worked his sensors. Sir, I genuinely don't know. My systems don't have a classification for what I Just read. Catherine stood at the holographic display and looked at the data from the Times pointed ear. His analysts had been working on it for 20 minutes. They had run it through 6 classification systems. None of them had returned a useful result. It could be a sensor malfunction, Drev said. It could be, Catherine agreed. The node may have activated in response to our presence, and the energy discharge was a calibration pulse of some kind. The resulting feedback, 200, 200, 202, could explain the anomalous reading. Yes, Catherine looked at the data, or it could not explain it. The room was quiet. We continue inward, Catherine said, but I want all weapon systems brought to readiness. Not active, not targeting anything, but ready. He turned away from the display, and I want a continuous live link between all ships, no signal gaps. Every vessel reports in on the minute. They reported in on the minute for about 40 minutes. The Times Grey Tide Times was a mid-class cruiser, the 6th ship in the fleet's right wing. She reported in at the 421 mark, 422, 423. At 424, she did not report in. At 425, she did not report in. At 426, the Times Iron Proclamations Times communications officer flagged the gap and attempted to raise the Times Grey Tide Times directly. No answer. Sensor sweep of her last known position. Returned empty space, not damaged ship. Adrift empty, not debris field empty. Just empty, as if the Times Grey Tide Times had never been. Find her. And GT, Keithra said, and his voice was perfectly steady. They found nothing. And GT, in the monitoring room, Myra said, 1 ship just dropped off the fleet. Telemetry. And GT, Torres was on a phone call, an actual phone call. The station had a direct hardline to Earth Defense Central, and Torres used it frequently. And the conversations she had on it were very short and very dry, and never sounded like anything important. She held up one finger to Myra without looking at her. Yes, she said into the phone. The Times Grey Tide cruiser class. Confirmed. A pause. No casualties. They're fine, they're just not in this system anymore. Another pause. I know, log it as a standard displacement event and send the form to my queue. She listened. Yes, I'll have the full report by 800. Thank you. She put the phone down. Myra was staring at her. They're fine. They're fine. Torres pulled up a new form. Displacement events are non-lethal. The ship is unharmed. Crew is unharmed. She began writing. They're approximately 4 light years away right now, which is going to take them a long time to get home from. Without assistance, but they're alive. And 4 light years. Myra turned back to her screen. Fleet was on full alert now. She could read it in their energy signatures. Weapons warming up, ships tightening into defensive formation. How? What? Just Shepard, Torres said just the one word. She went back to writing. At 4:31, the Times pale hammer times went dark. At 4:37, the Times sovereignty of wrath. At 4:41, 2 ships at once, the Times relentless. Times and a scout vessel whose name the translators rendered as something like Times forward spear. Cathra stood in the middle of his bridge and watched his fleet disappear and did not say anything. For a very long time, the room around him was controlled chaos, officers at their stations, orders going out. Sensors sweeping the communications. Board lighting up with reports from surviving ships, all saying the same thing in different ways. It came from nowhere. We saw nothing. It was there. And then it wasn't. We have no record of a weapon discharge. We have no record of an impact. We have nothing. Fall back. Catherine said, all ships reverse course. Maximum safe speed back to the exclusion line. Admiral said Thrall, and his voice had lost its earlier confidence entirely. Should we attempt to locate the missing ships? Their crews are beyond our reach. Cathras looked at his tactical display. 7 ships gone, 7 ships remaining. Move now. The fleet turned and ran. The monitoring room. Myra watched the fleet reverse course on her screen and said, they're running. Mtors was on the phone again. Yes, 7. Displaced 7 remaining, all moving back toward the exclusion line. At she checked the telemetry. About 80% of their maximum FTL capability. They're not quite panicking. A pause. Well, close enough. She listened. No, not yet. Let them reach the line. If they cross back out, we log it and close the file. If they stop at the line and try to regroup, She paused. Well, then we see what they do next. She put the phone down. Myra was watching her. The 7 ships that were displaced, those crews, they're really all right. They're in interstellar space 4 light years from home with no idea what happened to them. Tors said, so they're not having a great day, but they're alive and their ships are intact. She filled in a field on her form. Will send them navigational assistance in a few hours. Anonymous signal. They'll be able to find their way home. Myra stared at her. We're going to help them get home. They were trespassing. Tors signed the bottom of the form. That doesn't mean we want them dead. It means we want them gone. She set the form in the finished stack. There's a difference. Below the station, Earth turned in the dark. 7 alien ships ran for the edge of the solar system as fast as their engines would carry them. Tors picked up a new form. She filled it out with small, neat handwriting. Routine, thorough, done. The 7 surviving ships of the 14th battle group ran. There was no other word for it. They had started calling it a strategic withdrawal in the first 10 minutes. And by the 20-minute mark, no one was using that phrase anymore. They were running. They were running the way something runs when it does not know what it is running from, which is the worst kind of running there is. Admiral Kethra stood at the viewport of the Times Iron Proclamation Times and watched the stars and tried to think. 7 ships gone, no debris, no weapon signatures, no intercept tracks on any sensor, no communications from whatever had taken them, no demands, no warnings, no gloating, just 7 ships present. 1 second absent, the next as if something very large and very patient had simply reached out and moved them. He pulled up the sensor logs from each disappearance event. He had looked at them 4 times now. They all showed the same thing, nothing. Not the interesting kind of nothing, where you could see the ghost of a weapon discharge or a residual heat bloom or the kind of spatial distortion that certain exotic drives produced when they moved at speed. Just nothing. Empty space that had, a moment before, contained a warship, the nodes said. Ossic from his navigation console. He had been very quiet since the Times gray tide times went dark. It started with Node 4 after the Times pointed ears. Times contact and whatever it triggered. I know. Kethris did not look away from the viewport, whatever the nodes activated. It was already in position, already in the system. Our sensors never detected it because it was not radiating. He paused. It was waiting for us, Osik said, for anyone who crossed the line. Kethris finally turned away from the viewport. The humans did not scramble ships to intercept us. They did not send a challenge or a counter-offer. They activated something that had been sitting in their system, invisible for what I suspect is a very long time. He moved back to the command chair, and it removed 7 of our ships, without, as far as I can determine, using a single conventional weapon. Thrill, who had not smiled since the times Great Tide times vanished, said, "What kind of weapon doesn't leave a signature? The best kind," Kethris said. No one answered that. The times Iron Proclamation times was still 40 light minutes from the exclusion line when the times Pale Scepter times reported a contact, not a node this time, something else. "It's running parallel to us," said the times Pale Scepter's times captain, his voice coming through on the fleet channel carefully, steady in the way that voices are when they are working very hard at being steady, matching our speed exactly. Approximately 12,000 km to starboard. I'm getting fragments of a sensor. Return. It's large, Admiral, very large. But it's not reading clearly. My sensors keep trying to classify it and failing. Kethris looked at his own tactical display. He could see the ghost of it, too, now that he knew where to look. An edge, an absence of stars where stars should have been. "Don't target it," he said to the entire fleet. "Do not paint it with active sensors. Do not arm weapons." He kept his voice flat and certain, because flat and certain was the only tone he had left. "We are withdrawing. We are not engaging. If we do not give it a reason to act, perhaps it will not act." "And if it does act?" Thrill asked. Kethris had no answer. Tors watched the thing on her secondary screen and ate a protein bar. It was called Shepherd Unit 9, though the official designation was considerably longer and involved a string of numbers that no one in the project used in conversation. Unit 9 was the largest of the active response units, which was why Tors had authorized it for this particular situation. 14 ships, command class. Leading, she had wanted a strong showing. Unit 9 was currently 2.7 km long, which made it somewhat larger than the Times Iron Proclamation. Unlike the Times Iron Proclamation, it had no crew. Unlike the Times Iron Proclamation, it did not move by generating thrust in the conventional sense. Unlike the Times Iron Proclamation, it was not detectable by any sensor system that the VREF Dominion possessed, except in brief flashes when the geometry was exactly wrong and the edge of the unit's hull intersected with a sensor sweep at precisely the right angle. The VREF had been getting those brief flashes for the last 20 minutes. Tors thought that was probably fine. It was important that they knew something was there. It was equally important that they not be able to identify what or how many or where the others were. Unit 9 is tracking all 7 remaining ships, Myra said. No aggressive posture, it's just following them. Good. Tors folded the protein bar wrapper. Keep the other active units at hold. I only want 9 visible for now. Myra looked at her. How many active units are there? Tors considered this. More than 9, she said. Myra looked back at her screen. Right, she said. The time swift current times disappeared at 5:12. She had been on the left wing of the formation running with the others when a node on the inner system perimeter activated, not node 47. A different one they hadn't flagged, and the tight beam of unclassifiable energy hit a point in space approximately 800 m off the times swift current times port bow, ETSTS. Something was there. It was there for 3 seconds. The time swift current times was gone in 2. Captain Preth, who had been the first to notice the anomaly at the Mars shipyard, who had tried 3 different sensor frequencies on node 7, who had been smart enough to know he was looking at something he didn't understand. He and his crew of 400 were now 4 light years away in the dark, which was where Kethries did not want to think about right now. 6 ships remaining, then 5 as something that Kethries's sensors described only as times, a spatial discontinuity of undetermined origin. Times took the times voice of the Dominion times somewhere else entirely, and left not even a dust grain behind. Kethries made a decision. Stop, he said. The fleet dropped out of there. Emergency sprint. 765 ships came to a relative halt in the outer system. Engines cycling down from emergency thrust to a low idle, the stars slowly steadying around them. Admiral said thrill, and there was nothing professional left in his voice at all. We need to keep moving. We have been moving for an hour, Kethries said. 2 more ships gone while we ran. Running is not working. He looked at the tactical display. The ghost of Unit 9 was still there on the edge of his sensors, following them, waiting. If it wanted to take all of us, it could have done so already. It took some. It follows, it waits. He straightened in his chair. It is giving us time to think. I am going to use that time. Silence on the bridge. Open a channel, Kethries said. Broadcast on all frequencies. Every language in our database. He paused. Include human. His communications officer looked at him. Admiral, every frequency, every language, including human. Kethries looked at the viewport. The invisible shape was out there. The whole invisible solar system was out. They're watching. We are going to talk to them. The alert tone in the monitoring room was a soft 2-note chime. Tors heard it, set down her pen, and looked at her screen. Incoming transmission, Myra said, from the Vreth fleet, broadcasting on all frequencies. As she stopped, it's in English. Tors leaned over and turned up the audio. The voice that came through was Vreth, deep, flat voweled, with the cadence of a language being translated in real time by software that was very good but not perfect. It said, "This is Admiral Kethres of the Vreth, Dominion 14th Battle Group. We are halting our withdrawal, and we are requesting communication with whoever is in command of this system's defense. We are not armed. Weapons are cold. We are not maneuvering. We will wait." A pause. "We have made an error. We would like the opportunity to address it," the transmission repeated. Kethres's pronunciation of the word times error. Times was careful and a little awkward, like a word he had practiced. Tors listened to it twice. Then she picked up her phone. "Get me the Secretary of Space Defense," she said. The Secretary of Space Defense was a woman named Dr. Nora Chen, who had been in the job for 6 years and who Tors found efficient and clear-headed, and occasionally too cautious, which was fair because Tors was occasionally Cautious enough, which was probably why. The system had both of them. He wants to talk, Torres said. I heard, Doctor. Chen's voice was clear on the line. What's your read? He stopped running. That took nerve. Torres looked at the transmission data. He said times we made an error. Not times we were in the wrong times. Or times we apologized times or any of the formal diplomatic phrasing. He said times error. Like it was a navigational mistake. Professional problem to be corrected. She paused. He's scared and he's trying not to show it, and he's meeting us in the only language he thinks might work. Do we respond? Torres thought. About it, no, she said, a pause on the line. No, not yet. Let him sit with it for another hour. Torres looked at the tracking data for Unit 9. Shepard is still on station. He knows something is out there. Let him know that we heard him and we're taking our time. She looked at the remaining fleet on her screen, 5 ships. He needs to understand that we're not in a hurry, that we were never in a hurry. She paused. That we were waiting for him before he got here. I'm Dr. Chin was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. 1 hour. Then what then? We respond, Torres said. Politely. She hung up the phone. She pulled a fresh form from the stack on her desk. At the top of the form there was a field that said times incident type. Below that, a long list of checkboxes. Torres checked the box that said times. Diplomatic contact preliminary. She wrote the time in the field next to it. Small, neat, exact. Below the station. Earth went about its morning. Cathris waited. He had sent the transmission. He had stopped the fleet. He had told his remaining commanders to hold position and keep weapons cold and keep the communications channel open. And now he sat in his chair in the middle of his bridge and waited. The ghost of Unit 9 waited with him, 12,000 km to starboard. Motionless, the edge of it catching the starlight at exactly the wrong angle. Every few minutes. Just enough to remind him it was there. He thought about the files he had read, the intelligence assessments, the Council's 6 months of debate, all the language they had used. Times developing species, modest. Military capability, unlikely to represent a genuine defensive threat at this time. He thought about the times. Gray tide, the times pale hammer. The times sovereignty of wrath, the times swift current. He thought about the nodes passive for hours, active for seconds, and then whatever the nodes had woken up out there in the dark, patient as stone. What happens next is your choice. The warning buoys had been saying that for 11 years. He understood it now in a way that he suspected he could not have understood it before. It was not a threat. It was not a bluff. It was not theater. It was a description. The humans had laid out their system, built their nodes, grown their shepherd. Over 40 years or more, and then they had put up a fence and a sign and waited. Patient, unhurried, because they knew that eventually someone would cross the line. And they had made very sure that when that happened, what came next was entirely the someone's own fault. An hour after his transmission, his communications board chimed, incoming signal, human origin, broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies. He opened it. Human voice, female, calm with a slight regional accent he could not place. Said, Admiral Kethries, we received your transmission. Please hold your position. A representative of Earth Defense Command will contact you within 6 hours to discuss the terms of your fleets. Safe withdrawal from the sole exclusion zone. In the meantime, please note that the defense asset currently at 12,000 km to your starboard has been instructed to take no further action as long as your fleet maintains its current posture. Have a good evening. The channel closed. Kethri sat with it for a very long time. Have a good evening. Like, this was a minor inconvenience they were being courteous about. He looked at the tactical display. 5 ships, the ghost of something enormous, 12,000 km away, doing nothing, waiting for them to have a good evening. Someone get me some water, he said. No. One moved for a moment, then someone got him some water. The 5 remaining ships of the 14th Battle Group were escorted to the exclusion line by something they couldn't see. It stayed at 12,000 km to starboard the entire way. Kethries watched it on the edge of his sensors. The brief wrong angle glimpse of it. Every few minutes, just enough to know it was still there, and he kept the fleet at a steady, moderate speed that communicated no intention of doing anything sudden, which was the most important thing he had communicated. Since entering this system, the human negotiator had been efficient. Her name was Commander Tor's Earth Defense Command Sol Monitoring Station. She had joined the communication channel 6 hours after the initial contact, and the conversation had taken 11 minutes, which Kethries would later reflect was the shortest negotiation he had ever been part of. That resulted in the complete and total recalibration of everything he thought he knew. Tors had been polite, she had been specific. She had not gloated, which he found somehow more unsettling than gloating would have been. The terms were simple. The 5 ships would proceed directly to the exclusion line. They would not deviate from the agreed course. They would not activate sensors beyond navigational minimums. When they reached the line, they would cross it and continue at maximum safe speed for a minimum of 10 light hours before going to FTL. Kethries would carry a formal communicate back to the Vreth Dominion High Council. The 9 displaced ships and their crews would receive navigational assistance to return to Dominion space, provided at no cost, with no conditions attached. No conditions, Kethries had said, and he had not been able to keep the surprise out of his voice. None. Tors had confirmed the crews of your displaced ships made no decision to enter the system. They were following orders. We have no interest in penalizing them for that. A pause. Our interest is the Council. I understand, Kethries said. Good. Have a safe journey, Admiral. And that was that. The communicate was a data packet encrypted to the Council's frequency, sealed against any attempt to open it outside the Council chamber. Tors had explained this during the negotiation, and she had done so in a tone that suggested it was a standard formality, which made it feel less like a formality and more like a quiet demonstration that they could encrypt things in ways the Dominion could not easily crack. Kethries carried it the way a man carries something that might be heavier than it looks. The 9 displaced ships, when they received their navigational signals, found themselves with a precise course laid out for them, a safe path through interstellar space back to Dominion territory, accurate to a degree that their own navigation systems couldn't have managed from that position without a full survey. Anonymous. No signature on the signal, just the information, clean and complete, offered to people who had come to steal from you so they could get home safely. It was the part that bothered Kethries most. Not the weapons, not the Shepherd system, and its invisible units and its 40-year patience, not the 9 ships removed, without a trace, without a single conventional weapon discharge, the rescue signal, because that was what it was, a rescue signal, help extended without being asked for, given to people who had just violated the most serious boundary in this star system, because they were people and they needed to get home. It implied a certain confidence, a calm certainty that the 9 crews posed no further threat and deserved assistance, purely on the basis of being alive. He thought about that all the way to the exclusion line. The Wraith Dominion High Council convened 3 days after the 14th battle group returned to Dominion space. It was an emergency session, which in Council terms meant that only 37 of the 52 members were present, the rest having sent proxies or communications. Kethries presented his report. He presented it completely and without editorializing. The crossing, the passive survey period, the disappearances, Unit 9, the negotiation, the communique, the navigational assistance to the displaced crews. He gave them times, coordinates, sensor logs, and his personal assessment, which he had spent 3 days composing and which was the most carefully worded document he had produced in his career. When he finished, the chamber was quiet. High Chancellor Varath, who was 80 years old and had been running council sessions for 30 of them, sat at the head of the table with the expression of someone assembling a puzzle with too many pieces. You're telling us, said Councillor Press Young, ambitious from the military council, that a species we assessed as developing displaced 9 of our ships with no identifiable weapon system. Yes, Kethries said, and the remaining 5 ships were escorted to our border by a unit of their defense system that your sensors could not classify. Yes, and their response to this entire incident, Press looked at his documents, was to offer our displaced crews navigational assistance home, free of charge, with no conditions. Yes. Press sat back. And then they sent us a communique. They did. Kethries placed the sealed data packet on the table, which I have not opened per their instruction and the terms of our withdrawal. The council looked at the packet. Open it, Varath said. Communique from Earth Defense Command to the Wraith Dominion High Council was 3 pages long in standard Wraith script, which was what the translation software had produced. It was written in language that was formal without being cold, direct without being aggressive, and it contained a number of statements that the council read twice and then read again. It began with a brief acknowledgement of the incident and noted that the 9 displaced ships were en route home. It expressed no anger about the incursion. It expressed no threat. It said Earth understands that border disputes sometimes require direct verification. We are familiar with this approach. We simply ask that you now consider our border verified. Then it said we would like to formally invite the Wraith Dominion to send a diplomatic delegation to Earth for the purpose of establishing a permanent non-incursion agreement, formalized trade corridors, and a framework for future contact. This invitation is open-ended. We are not in a hurry. Then it described in 3 very calm paragraphs the sole exclusion zone defense system, not all of it. Kethries was quite sure it was not all of it, but what it described was enough. The Shepherd Network had been under construction for 41 years. It consisted of passive observation nodes, active relay nodes, and response units. The response units were unmanned and ranged in size from small interceptors to units of the class Kethris had encountered, which the document referred to simply as time. Heavy response. The network covered the entirety of the exclusion zone with overlapping sensor coverage. The displacement technology used by the response units was, the document noted, non-lethal. No targeted ship had ever been destroyed, and all displaced crews had been or would be returned to Dominion space safely. The system had been designed, the document said, not to punish incursion but to make it pointless. And then the last line of the technical section: we have 19 other systems protected by comparable networks. Should any neighboring species wish to verify this, we invite them to consult the records of the Horde War incursions of 2198 through 2204, which are public and available through any galactic archive. The Council read that paragraph 4 times. Counselor Press said in a very different voice than before, the Horde War. They stopped 3 Horde incursions into their territory during the Horde War. Yes, said the Council's chief historian, we have records of that. We assessed it at the time as a statistical anomaly given the Horde's record elsewhere. We assessed it wrong, Verth said. Room was very quiet. 19 systems, said another counselor, older, from the outer territories. They have 19 systems protected by these networks. That is what they claim, Press said. They claimed the Sol exclusion zone was defended, Kethra said from his seat along the side of the table. He had not been supposed to speak again, but no one stopped him. They claimed it in an announcement broadcast on every frequency in the galaxy for 11 years. They were not bluffing then. The Council absorbed this. Then Verth said, there is one more page. The final page of the communique was the shortest. It said, a representative of Earth's diplomatic corps will arrive at the Dominion capital within 14 standard days of this communique's receipt. The representative will be traveling alone and unarmed and will come in a civilian vessel. We ask that full diplomatic courtesy be extended. The representative's name is Ambassador Dara Yun. She looks forward to meeting you. Verth looked at the page. One person, he said, alone, unarmed. Someone else said, in a civilian ship. The Council sat with that. One diplomat alone, unarmed, coming to their capital 14 days after their third best fleet had been dismantled in their solar system, with nothing around her but whatever confidence she was carrying in her own head. They're not afraid of us, Press said. He said it quietly. The ambition was entirely gone from his voice, just the fact sitting there. No. Verth agreed. He looked at the communique one more time, then folded it carefully with both hands. Prepare the diplomatic wing, he said. Give Ambassador Yun the guest suite on the east side. It has a good view. He stood slowly. And someone find out exactly how many species they have those networks for. Not what the document says. Full archival research. Everything public. He paused. I want to understand exactly what kind of people we have been ignoring the warnings of. Kethras went home after the council session. He had a house in the capital district, a quiet place on a hill with a view of the city, and he had not been there in 6 months. His partner Bess had been following the news reports with a careful attention. of someone who knows more than the news is saying because she had been married to a fleet admiral for 20 years and she had learned to read the gaps. She looked at his face when he came through the door and she didn't ask anything. She made him a drink. She sat with him on the terrace with the city spread out below them. All the lights of it. The ordinary, enormous fact of all those. After a while he said, "I got it wrong." "Yes," she said. "I read the files, I did the analysis, I made the calculation." He held the drink without drinking it. "I thought the warning was theater. I thought they were projecting strength. They didn't have." He was quiet for a moment. "They weren't projecting anything, they were describing something." Bess looked at the city. "Will the council send the delegation?" "The ambassador is already coming to us." He finally took a drink. "One person. Alone." Unarmed, she turned to look at him. "She's going to sit across a table from 52 council members," he said, "after 9 of our ships were displaced from their solar system, and she's going to be polite and reasonable and entirely unafraid." He looked at the city. "And the thing that's keeping me awake is that her being unafraid is not an act." Bess was quiet for a moment, then she said, "What are they like?" "The humans." Catherine thought about the voice on the communications channel. Flat, calm, direct. The paperwork in the background, he could hear the scratch of a pen faintly. During the pauses, the navigational signal sent to his displaced crews with no conditions attached. "They're very calm," he said, "about things that shouldn't be calm." He finished his drink. "I think they've been ready for a long time," he said. "And they were just waiting for someone to finally show up." Ambassador Dora Yun arrived at the Vreth capital planet on day 13, 1 day early. The diplomatic protocol staff at the Dominion capital had been preparing for 14 days of arrival, and they scrambled to adjust which Cathras, who had been assigned as the council's liaison for the visit, largely because he was the only person on the planet who had actually spoken to a human, suspected was not an accident. The civilian ship she arrived in was a small thing, a courier-class vessel with Earth defense command markings painted discreetly on the hull. She had sent ahead a short message saying she was ahead of schedule and asking if that was a problem, and she had done so in perfect Vreth, which no one had expected. She walked off the landing ramp in the capital spaceport, and she was not what Cathras had imagined. She was short. Humans were shorter than Vreth on average, and Yun was short even for a human, a compact, precise person with close-cut gray hair and a face that had lived a long time in it. She wore formal diplomatic dress. She carried a bag over one shoulder and a small case in her hand, nothing else. She looked at the delegation waiting for her on the tarmac. 12 officials, 4 security staff, 2 translators, Cathras himself, and she smiled, not a careful diplomatic smile, a real one, the kind of smile people produce when they're genuinely glad to see you, which was a very particular kind of social skill in a situation like this, and Cathras was not entirely sure what to do with it. "Admiral Cathras," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "It's good to meet you in person." He took her hand and used the correct amount of pressure which he had researched. "Ambassador Yun, welcome to Vreth. Thank you for having me." She looked at the sky, clear with the capital city spread around the landing zone, the towers of the council building visible in the distance, It's beautiful. We will show you to your quarters, Catherine said. Wonderful. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. I'd love a cup of tea if that's possible. It was a long flight. The council session was scheduled for the next morning. Catherine showed Yun to the diplomatic wing, confirmed that the East Suite was ready, confirmed that something resembling tea could be produced, and left her to settle in. He went to his own office in the council building and sat at his desk and tried to prepare. He had been trying to prepare since the council session 3 days ago, when they confirmed the scope of what Earth had been quietly doing for the last half-century. The archival research had taken the historians 2 days. They had gone through 40 years of galactic event records and conflict reports, and the kind of data that accumulates in the background of galactic history because no one is specifically looking for it. What they had found in 2198, during the peak of the Horde War, 3 Horde incursion fleets had entered human territory through different approach vectors. None of them had returned. Horde had logged them as lost in combat. The battles were never described in any human record. No debris was ever found. In 2209, a Pelian slaving operation had attempted to take a human colony on the outer edge of their territory. The colony had 12,000 residents and a defense force. The slaving fleet had 17 ships. 4 days after the attack began, 11 of the slaving fleet ships were gone. The other 6 left and never came back. The colony was unharmed. The Pelians had never attempted to expand in that direction again, and their official records describe the incident as a navigational error. In 2231, a species called the Drev, now extinct due to other causes, had attempted to establish a military outpost in what they classified as unclaimed space, which happened to be inside the human exclusion zone around one of their outer colonies. The outpost had 40 personnel and was constructed over 6 months. On the day it became operational, it vanished. All 40 personnel were returned to Drev space unharmed via navigational signal. 3 days later, the Drev had lodged a formal protest with the Galactic Assembly. Earth's representative had attended the hearing and politely explained that the space in question was clearly marked as a human exclusion zone, that the Drev had been warned repeatedly, and that all 40 personnel had been returned safely and without condition. The representative had expressed regret for the inconvenience. The assembly had moved on to other matters. There were 11 other incidents in the archive. Kethris had read all of them. They all had the same shape, the same outcome. The humans were always polite afterward. They always returned the people. They never escalated beyond what was necessary to make the incursion stop, and no one in 40 years had got anything useful out of the exchange. No tactical data, no weaknesses, no idea how the Shepherd system actually worked, just missing ships and navigational signals and a polite communique every time. The council session began at 900. All 52 members were present. This had not happened at a formal session in 11 years. Yun sat at the visitor's position at the end of the long table, with Kethris at her left as liaison and the chief translator at her right. She had a cup of tea. She had a thin folder of documents. She had the same smile. High Chancellor Verith opened the session. Ambassador Yun, he said, we thank you for making The journey. We would like to begin by formally acknowledging the incident involving our 14th Battle Group and extending our "Please don't," Yun said. Verith stopped. Your ships crossed a clearly marked border that has been in place for 11 years, Yun said. Her voice was pleasant and specific. The warning was issued correctly. The response was proportionate. Your crews were returned safely. The incident is, from our perspective, closed. She folded her hands on the table. If we spend time on apologies, we're going to be here for a very long time, and I don't think that's why either of us is in this room. The council was very still. Verith looked at her for a long moment. No, he said, I suppose it isn't. The discussion took 4 hours. Yun was clear. She was specific. She had her thin folder of documents, which turned out to contain a draft non-incursion agreement, a proposed trade corridor framework, and a 6-page summary of Earth's current diplomatic relationships with 12 other galactic species, which she passed around the table with the comfortable ease of someone sharing a menu. She answered questions directly and without hedging. When she didn't know something, she said so. When a counselor pushed her on something she had already answered, she answered it again with the same words and the same tone, which was more effective than raising her voice would have been. Counselor Press, who had recovered some of his former sharpness, asked the question that everyone was thinking. The Shepherd Network, he said. The document you sent described it as covering 19 systems. Correct, Yun said. Our archival research suggests it may cover more than 19 systems. Your archival research is thorough, Yun said. I'm impressed. Is it more than 19? Yun smiled. The document said 19. That's the accurate figure for fully operational networks. She picked up her tea. Networks in various stages of construction or testing are a separate category. How many in various stages of construction or testing? That's classified, she said. Pleasantly. Press sat back. Another counselor, older, from the defense committee, said, the displacement technology, non-lethal. As stated in the communique. Correct. It has been non-lethal in every recorded incident. Yes. Could it be lethal if you chose to use it that way? Yun looked at him for a moment. The smile didn't change. We've never had occasion to find out, she said. The defense counselor wrote something on his notes and did not ask a follow-up. At 1300 hours, they took a break for lunch. Cathras walked with Yun to a small reception room off the main corridor, where food had been laid out. He poured himself water and tried to think of something to say, which was unusual for him. You've done this before, he said finally. Yun helped herself to something from the food table. These meetings? Yes, a few times with the Pelions. The Drev. She glanced at him. We don't talk publicly about specific negotiations. No, he said, but the archive implies certain things. He held his water. You come alone, one person. You're always polite. You always offer the same basic framework. He looked at her. This is a process you've done before. Yun ate something, considered. It seemed satisfied. Earth had a long time to think about how we wanted to manage our relationships with other species, she said, and we had a long time to figure out what we wanted those relationships to look like. She looked at the food table. We'd rather have neighbors than enemies. Neighbors you can do business with. Enemies cost money. She picked up another piece. So we built the networks, we mark the borders clearly, and we wait for people to either accept the boundaries or test them. If they test them, they find out that the boundaries are real. Then we have a conversation about being neighbors, and if they test again. Keithra said, no one has tested twice. Yun said, she said it simply. Not as a threat. The same way you'd say times no one has ordered the fish and been disappointed. Just a fact, we're good at marking things clearly, she said, and we're patient. The non-incursion agreement was signed at 1600 hours. It was a standard framework, the kind of document that could be expanded later with provisions for trade, court, or negotiations, and a schedule for future diplomatic contact. Yun signed for Earth, Verith signed for the Dominion. The room held for a photograph that would go into both species' historical archives, and then people began moving toward the door with the slightly relieved energy of a long meeting. Successfully finished, Keithra signed as witness. He stood at the table with the pen in his hand for a moment after he wrote his name, looking at the document. Admiral Yun said she was gathering her folder, her thin stack of papers, the cup of tea she had been carrying with her all day. One question, he said. Of course. He looked at the document at the table at the chair she had been sitting in for 4 hours, alone. At the end of the table with 52 council members. When you came here, he said, alone, unarmed, was that a deliberate signal? She looked at him. What kind of signal? That you weren't afraid of us? Yun tilted her head slightly. We weren't afraid of you, she said. So it wasn't a signal, it was just accurate. She picked up her case. I was afraid I'd miss my connection at the relay station and be a day late, but not of you. He absorbed that. The 9 crews, he said, the navigational signals, you didn't have to do that. No, she agreed, we didn't. Why did you? She looked at him for a moment, and the smile was quieter than it had been all day, more genuine in its quietness. Because they were a long way from home, she said, and that's not their fault. She said good evening to Kethries, nodded to the remaining council members, and walked toward the door with her bag over one shoulder and her case in hand, exactly the way she had walked off the landing ramp, like she had every reason in the world to be comfortable. Whatever room she walked into, back on the Earth station, Tors received the confirmation at 1730 local station time. The message from Ambassador Yun was short, the way all the useful messages were. Agreement signed, returning to Earth tomorrow. Full report to follow. The East Suite has a very good view. Tors read it, wrote the time in her log, and pulled the Vreth 14th Battle Group file from her active stack. It was a thick file. Incursion Form 7, Delta Shepherd. Pre-activation log, activation authorization, displacement event logs for each of the 9 ships, navigational assistance request forms, the communication transcripts with Kethries, the coordination records with the Secretary's office, the communique drafts, every step documented, timed. Signed, she wrote the closure date on the tab. She wrote times resolved. Diplomatic agreement times in the outcome field. She put the file in the finished stack, which was on the right side of her desk and was considerably larger than the active stack on the left. Then she looked at Myra, who had been at the adjacent console for what had now been 2.5 days straight, with a series of very short sleeping breaks, and who had the slightly hollow Look of someone who had spent a significant period of time in close proximity to events that they would be processing for years afterward. Go get some sleep, Torres said. Myra looked at. Sorry. Is it over? This one is. Torres looked at her screen. The exclusion zone was quiet. The nodes were passive. The Shepherd units were at rest, back in their positions, waiting for the next time they would be needed. Get some sleep. Come back in the morning. There's another possible incursion flag near the outer perimeter. Looks like a Pelion scouting group. Probably nothing, but I want fresh eyes on it. Myra stood up. She looked at the file Torres had just closed. How many files are in that stack? Torres looked at the finished stack, thought about it. That's the 43rd incursion file I've closed, she said, give or take. Myra looked at her. 43. Some of them were scouts, unmanned probes, a few merchant vessels with bad nav charts. Torres looked at the screen. 6 that were like this one, actual fleet incursions. She picked up her pen. Go get some sleep. Myra went. Torres sat alone in the quiet room below her. Earth turned. All the cities scattered across the night side. All those people going about the ordinary, enormous business of being alive, not thinking about the exclusion zone or the Shepherd network or the 43rd closed file or the navigational signals sent to people who had come to take the thing those cities sat on. Torres thought about none of those things either. She pulled a new form from the stack on the left side of her desk. At the top it said, preliminary incursion. Alert outer perimeter. She wrote the date, she wrote the time, she wrote the sector designation and the suspected fleet origin and the current distance from the warning buoys. Small, neat letters, each one exact. Then she picked up her phone and called down to the cafeteria and asked if they still had coffee at this hour, and they did, and she asked them to send up 2 cups, one for now and one for later, because it was going to be a long night. It was always going to be a long night. She had made peace with that a long time ago. Shepherd network breathed in the dark. Between the stars, patient, quiet. Ready, the warning buoys played their message on every frequency, in every language, for anyone close enough to hear. What happens next is your choice. They always had a choice. They always did the same thing, and Earth, as it always had, waited.